Alrighty, so I recently wrapped up my pedalboard build. If you haven't seen those videos, you should definitely go check them out. I ended up with a big tonex on the board, which, to be honest, wasn't a pedal I originally expected on acquiring. A lot of the other pedals I put on the board were in a more budget category, and to be honest, that's sort of more of my jam. I really think you can get some awesome value, sounds, and tones from budget gear. But I did in fact end up with this large tonex on the board, so I figured I'd make a video about how I kind of ended up on that decision and some of the other options I considered. Because there are a lot of great options out there on the market, but just not ones that really fit the boxes I wanted to check. So first things first, when I was kind of doing this price comparison, I was going against the Tonex 1, which retails for $180. I of course didn't end up with a Tonex 1, I ended up with the big boy Tonex. I ended up getting this used on Reverb for $250, which I know is a ways away from the $170 price point. But for me at least, if I exit out of the $50, $60 price point, that's sort of when I make the change from the budget in category to something more expensive. And at that point, I have different boxes I want to check and things I want to look for. So getting right into it, some of the things I considered were, of course, the Behringer TM300. This is actually a pretty well-reviewed pedal, and it's really cheap at $25. I saw a lot of cool videos about this, and the sounds people get out of it seem pretty great. The one issue for me at least is it doesn't do cabinet simulation, it's just amp simulation. So in order to get both, you'd have to pair this with something like this M-Wave IR box, which again is at a great price at $40. But when you combine that together, you're around the $60 price point, and for me, the value wasn't quite there. You'd also end up taking up 2 spots on the pedal board, that's additional cabling and powering, and it just ended up being a little more complicated than I wanted. There's some other great options as well, like this Solid Studio from Nuex. It does both amp and cab simulation, but the price point of $200 is kind of steep. One thing I want to mention is there are a lot of great single amp emulation pedals out there, like this specific series of pedals from Joyo. The price point of $40 is great, so if you know a specific amp sound that you like and you don't think you're going to deviate from that very often, this would probably be a better choice. Of course, there are all the well-known options like the pedals from Universal Audio, but again, $350 is pretty expensive. One thing that I almost ended up buying and was really intriguing to me was this Tank G guitar pedal. A lot of different manufacturers will put their logo on this, but I think it's pretty much the same unit across the board. This thing is $80 and it seems to do a ton. It's a multi-effect unit and it does a bunch of different things like drive, delay, compression, reverb, modulation, all the things you might want, and it does amp and cab simulation. It has Bluetooth, a bunch of different things, an app, and I even think you can profile with this thing. So it's a really cool offering. The one thing, honestly, that steered me away from this is it's just not as mainstream. One of the benefits to Tonex to me is the user experience, the marketplace, the community buy-in, which I'll get into later. More is another well-known budget brand, and they actually had some pretty compelling offerings. I found their pedals pretty appealing because of the simplicity, the way you interact with them. They have a lot of different features like IR loading and different cab models, but their pedals are about $130 right now each. So when you combine them, it would be a pretty steep price point. Joyo, being another well-known budget-in brand, has some different offerings like this preamp house. It's $150 though, which again is kind of high, close enough to that Tonex price point that I'd rather just jump for that. There's of course the Boss IR2. I have no doubt that this would sound great, work great. Boss is a really well-known brand, but $200 is above the cost of the Tonex, and the Tonex will do more. So why did I pick Tonex specifically? I do have some gripes about Tonex. I find the way you interact with the pedals, both on the physical interface of the pedals and the interface of the Tonex software, to be awful. But the ToneNet is something that the community has widely adopted. There's tons of new profiles and captures pretty much every single day, and there's a pretty rich marketplace of people creating models either for free or for sale. Well-known creators you probably have already seen on YouTube, and even, normal people like me. Now, I'm not saying that Tonex is necessarily cheap, but I think they've done a really good job at sort of cornering the marketplace with what they offer at the price point they're offering it at. One little bonus thing I want to mention here too was NAMM Neural Amp Modeler. There's some pretty interesting things people are doing with getting this running on a Raspberry Pi. That's potentially a very interesting project. I might try that in the future, but it was just a little more in depth than I really wanted. So yeah, that's how I ended up with the Tonex. At least let me know your thoughts.